All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to solve a problem that I know many of you have run into, especially if you're pushing your home network to its limits. We are going to walk through a really simple but super effective upgrade for your OpenWrt router. It's all about adding a USB swap file to get that rock-solid stability we're all after.
So, does this sound familiar to you? You've got your router humming along, you load it up with some awesome stuff like Docker or maybe a media server, and then things just get weird. Services start crashing out of nowhere, the web interface locks up, and you find yourself reaching for that power cord way too often. If you're nodding your head right now, you are in exactly the right place.
Meet the villain of our story today, the killer, which stands for out-of-memory killer. You see, your router probably doesn't have a ton of RAM, so when it gets overwhelmed, this little process wakes up. And its job? It's to start killing applications to free up memory. The problem is, it really doesn't care if it's killing your most important Docker container. It's ruthless, and that's what's behind those sudden, infuriating crashes.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll confirm we've got a low RAM problem. Then, we'll jump into the fix, creating the swap file. After that, we'll fine-tune it so it works smarter. Then comes the really crucial part, making sure this whole setup survives a reboot. And we'll finish things off with some pro tips to keep everything stable for the long haul.
Okay, first things first. Before we start changing things, let's be sure that memory is actually our bottleneck. How do we know for sure that our router is gasping for air?
Well, the root of the problem is pretty simple. Routers are built to route packets, right? They're not really designed to be tiny little servers. So when we, as home lab enthusiasts, start loading them up with heavy services like Docker, we can burn through that small pool of RAM incredibly fast. It's a classic growing pain.
All right, time to get our hands dirty. Go ahead and SSH into your router and run this command, free-h. Now look for the line that says swap. See that? If it's just a row of zeros, that's the smoking gun. It means your router has zero virtual memory to fall back on when things get tight. It literally has no breathing room.
So you know what we're going to do? We're going to give it that breathing room. We're going to create something called a swap file on a cheap USB drive. You can think of this as a slow but life-saving emergency reserve of memory.
The entire process really just boils down to these 5 commands. That's it. We're going to create a file, lock down its permissions, format it correctly, turn it on, and then of course double-check our work. It's a nice, clean sequence.
This is the big one, the first command. We're using a tool called DD to create a blank file on our USB drive. In this case, it's a 512 megabyte file that will become our virtual memory. Now, one quick but really important note, make sure that path, that /temp/mount ed/disk1_part1 part, actually matches where your USB drive is mounted on your system.
And boom, here's the payoff. After you've run through those 5 commands, run free-h one more time. And look at that. That swap line is no longer all zeros. We've officially created and activated 512 megs of swap space. Your router can finally breathe a sigh of relief.
Awesome. So we have swap, but we're not done yet. Now we need to get a little smarter and tell the system how to use it. So we don't want it constantly using that slow USB drive only when it's an emergency.
This is controlled by a kernel setting that's, believe it or not, called swappiness. It's just a number from 0 to 100. If you set it high, the system gets really aggressive about using swap. If you set it low, like we're going to, it'll do everything it can to keep things in your fast physical RAM and only use swap as a last resort.
For what we're doing here, the magic number is 10. This is the sweet spot. It basically tells the system, hey, stick to the fast RAM as much as possible, but please, if you're about to run out of memory and crash, use that swap file as a safety net. It's the perfect balance.
So to lock this in, we need 2 commands. The first one, using sysdl, applies the change right now, for this session. But that won't stick around after a reboot. So the second command writes that exact same setting into a configuration file, making sure our swappiness value of 10 is permanent.
And speaking of reboots, this is probably the single most important part of the whole setup. This is where things can go wrong. How do we make absolutely sure our swap file turns on, automatically, every single time the router boots up? It's a little trickier than you might think.
So here's the catch. On OpenWrt, USB drives get mounted pretty late in the boot-up sequence. If you use the standard startup methods, the system will try to enable our swap file before the USB drive is even visible. Naturally, the command fails, and you boot up with no swap at all.
So the solution is this clever little startup script. Don't worry about the details. Here's what it does.
Instead of trying to turn on swap immediately, it starts a little loop. For up to 2 minutes, it just checks once a second, is the swap file there yet? Is it there yet? The moment it sees the file, which means the USB drive is finally mounted, it runs the swap on command and its job is done. It's patient, and it's super reliable.
Putting this script into action is easy. You just save the code into a file, make that file executable with chmod, and then tell the system to run it on startup. Then, the moment of truth. You reboot the whole device to see if it worked.
Once your router comes back online, you can prove that it worked with this simple command. You're just checking the system log for that little message our script leaves behind, enabling swap. If you see that line, congratulations. Your permanent, reboot-proof solution is officially working.
All right, we're in the home stretch. Let's just quickly go over a few key rules of thumb and best practices to make sure you have the best experience possible.
First, stick with the swap file. It's way more flexible than a dedicated swap partition, much easier to create or resize later. Second, if you can, definitely use a USB 3.0 drive. It'll be faster and more stable than an old USB 2.0 stick. Also, don't go crazy with the size. 512 megs is usually more than enough. And most importantly, always remember what swap is for. It is a safety net for stability, not a turbo boost for performance. It won't make your router faster, but it will stop it from crashing.
And that's pretty much it. In just a few minutes, you've tamed the OOM killer and given your OpenWrt router a massive stability upgrade. You've built a much more robust foundation for all your cool projects. So the only question left is, now that you've got a router that can actually handle the pressure, what are you going to build with it? Thanks for tuning in.